more on what a rating downgrade would mean for Europe. Let's bring in our roundtable. Joining us from Philadelphia, Mauro Guillen, director of the Lauder Institute at the Wharton School, and Nicholas Economides, professor of economics at the NYU Stern School of Business. He has advised the governments of some major European countries. He's also worked with the Fed and the Bank of Greece. Professor Economides joins us from our office in San Francisco. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And Professor Guillen, let me start with you. That news that we just heard from my colleague Michael McKee, France's finance minister, confirming the downgrade.
Well, this is obviously bad news for France. It's also bad news for the plan that is in place, as your reporter mentioned a few minutes ago, because it affects the credibility of the stability facility. But you know, France has a government deficit that is bigger than Italy's, and it has an unemployment rate that is also higher than Italy's. So I don't think anybody should be taken by surprise by this.
Professor Economides, no surprise to you either?
Well, this was very much expected. On the other hand, it's one thing for things to be expected. It's another thing when things happen. So there will be effects over time. The immediate effect has been small, but I would expect that with the downgrade of the EFSF, there will be effects further down the line.
Professor Economides, let me stick with you because, as I mentioned earlier this week, there's a function on the Bloomberg terminal. It's called Crisis Go, and you can see what the percentage of debt to GDP is in some of the eurozone countries. And for France, the percentage of debt to GDP is 82%. By comparison, you see countries like Italy, it's at 118, and Greece is 144. Do these ratings agencies still believe, sir, that the percentage of debt to GDP in France in particular, the second largest economy in the eurozone, is not sustainable?
I don't think that we are at the point in where it's not sustainable. Such a ratio around 70%, 80% is not sustainable. It's okay. I mean, it's something that the countries will be able to pay. The situations in some other countries where we're talking about over 100%, over 120%, in Greece over 140%, yes. Is much more critical, much more troublesome.
Professor Guillen, are you more concerned with a credit downgrade in and of itself, or is the size of a downgrade that is of more concern at this point?
Well, both variables, of course, are important. So obviously the French should be relieved that they didn't get 2 notches, a downgrade of 2 notches. Yeah, I mean, the amount of the reduction in the creditworthiness is obviously of consequence. And as we've been talking, all sorts of things are going to change as a result of that. We haven't felt the effects yet, but all sorts of things over the next few weeks are going to be affected.
Professor Guillen, let me stick with you because you just mentioned an important point, the credit downgrade and how that would affect the European Financial Stability Facility, which has its own credit rating as well. Is there a ripple effect because of that? What would happen?
Well, we still don't know. And the problem, of course, is that the facility is not fully funded. So the plan from a couple of months ago was to essentially issue debt, right? So it's a leveraged kind of fund. And so with France and Germany being the most important backers of the fund, if one of those 2 countries, namely France, gets downgraded, then that essentially affects the creditworthiness of the whole fund and all of the bonds that it issues. So it is a serious problem. You know, I don't want to downplay that, but we're going to have to wait a few weeks to see exactly how this plays out.
Professor Economides, Spain and Italy are also said to be in danger of having their ratings cut. But this week they seem to be making gains to bring down borrowing costs. Both countries sold 26.75 euros in the past 2 days, and yields fell at their first auctions of the year. Why wasn't that enough?
Well, I think what has happened, as you remember, the European Central Bank gave about $500 billion to banks in a 3-year loan setup, and some amount from that was invested in sovereign bonds, and that's why we see this relatively temporary decrease in the interest rates in Spain and Italy. I don't think that this is necessarily an indication of what's going to happen in the longer run. We need a much stronger EFSF, and as was said just a minute ago,
yes,
it's very, very, very important for the EFSF to expand dramatically, to be able to give the signal to the markets that the European leaders believe that there is a serious crisis and they're willing to put money down for the solution of this crisis.
Gentlemen, we have a minute left. Professor Guillen, German Bunds gained today. The yields on 5- and 10-year securities fell to record lows on where Germany will still have its AAA rating when the dust clears today. Are we now going to see a big flight to what's perceived to be the safety of German debt?
Well, I hope not, because that will spell trouble, not just for the peripheral countries in Europe and for France, but eventually for Germany. You see, what we must remember is that any troubles in Europe, even if they don't affect Germany today or tomorrow, eventually will come back to haunt Germany, because Germany is very dependent on the eurozone.
Professor Mauro Guillen and Professor Nicholas Economides joining us to talk about the word of credit downgrades coming from Europe today. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
We will continue our conversation on Europe and tell you how the debt crisis is affecting the currency. Coming up, why the euro has hit a 16-month low. You're watching Bottom Line on Bloomberg Television.